All right. Thank you for having me. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right. So my background is as a therapist educator. So I come into farming and permaculture with the intention of making this accessible, making this easy, and hopefully making this fun. So today we're going to talk about homesteading concepts. So what does it mean to have a homestead? What does it mean to aim for creating sustenance and self-sufficiency? And what kind of design will enable you to get there within this lifetime? Yeah, so, and within a reasonable amount of daily investment. So I do have people, they come and visit me and they say, how many hours a day are you doing this? And I assure them that I spend about 30 minutes to a maximum of 2 hours during the week. And then sometimes on the weekends, it's a little bit longer, but it's a little bit more joyful as well. It's an aimless wandering that you really can't call highly productive. So that's the joyful part. Great.
And you're good to go.
Yay! All right, so planting an heirloom food forest, aiming for a homestead, having a goal of self-sufficiency. This doesn't just benefit you, it benefits ecosystems. It's something that you can pass on to your kids if you have them. So it sets up the next generation for abundance. Whereas row crops and beds, these don't transform ecosystems. So what you're doing, growing fruit trees, that's really what's going to provide the next generation with abundance. So up to 70% of what my family eats generally comes from the food forest. It's really exciting when we hit that 90% mark, but on average, we're teetering. And we are learning these different hacks for getting it on the table faster and in ways that don't necessarily cost us the whole day. We want it to be something that's fast and easy and comparable with any type of food prep. So if you're going to the grocery store and you're buying raw produce, then you're spending the same amount of time that I am. In fact, you might be spending more time than I am, because if you're going and you're picking out your own produce, then that's a commute. And it's going to be more time investment than me stepping outside my door and having the harvest, right? So as you cultivate your rare fruit orchards, your food forests, your homestead, it can be actually time savings. Additionally, with today's health crisis being what it is, and we'll talk about that, you're going to save time as your health improves in illness. And so that's really what we're going for. There's a lot of doomsday speak that we hear, and so when you have a rare fruit orchard, a food forest, a permaculture garden, it rolls down your back a little bit differently. It doesn't seem as terrifying, all of these things that get pushed in the news, because you know that you're creating abundance. You know that you are, going for what is meaningful. So I want to hear from you, because there's a lot of things that I could say today. But what I really want to talk about is whatever you want me to talk about. So if I could have a few brave souls. 4-H, you want me to talk about 4-H? Okay, great. We lead a children's group, ages 5 to 10, Mondays and Fridays. It's free through the county so that families can learn food forestry. So just raise your hand as a brave soul. You came today, you saw the topic of the lecture. What are you hoping that I'll talk about? Just a few brave souls. What are you wanting me to talk about? Yes.
I'd love to hear about varieties that have been successful and what you're growing, and just tips that you've learned along the way to be more successful in the food forest in your garden.
Okay, for sure. Yes.
Growing tomatoes.
Growing tomatoes. We'll touch on that briefly. Yes.
doing this in a small yard.
Okay, great, yeah. So I am referencing yard size as being 1/10 of an acre, being able to support a family, a small family. So all you need to support a family, if you grow in layers, is 1/10 of an acre, which is the average sized backyard. If you have smaller than that, I'll also offer some suggestions. Yes?
Stuff that produces food in like a year's time or so, rather than many years.
Right, absolutely.
Working with code enforcement.
Code enforcement. Yeah, that's a great one. Okay, for sure, we'll talk about that. Yes.
How much money is involved? What's the setup, a ballpark for setup and payments?
Absolutely, we'll talk about budget. Yes, my love. Okay, we do offer tours Sunday at 5. Thank you for referencing that. Yes.
What grows under oak trees besides firs?
Okay, great. I think a lot. I mean, I can tell you what I'm growing, and it's a lot. So, absolutely, oaks are an ecosystem in and of themselves. So, as long as you're not growing root crops, so much can grow. And I'll definitely hit on that. Yes.
How sun or the changing of the sun in the season affects what you're growing?
All right. I will do my best. Here we go. Yes, I love it. I love the different questions, and I'll weave it in as I can. So, for me, health is very important. I have a son. I want for him to be happy. I want my husband to be happy. I want us all to be happy. And when we talk about happiness, money does come into play, right? So for us, we're not wanting to break the bank. And a lot of people come to our food forest and they say, wow, you guys must have spent a lot of money. However, we're not paying a third party to install plants. And I do joke that I'm the Johnny Appleseed of permaculture, because I do recommend growing things from seed. And when you have crop succession, you can plan to have a yield your first year and then plan it out from there. And so keeping in mind the word succession is really important, that we'll touch on. And then having purpose. So for me, involving the community, providing this education, and authentically learning this myself so that it's really transformative in our lives. So, there's a lot on social media that you're like, is that real? And in my experience, I'm wanting this to be real. We are actually cooking this stuff, we're actually using it. And my son, we joke that he is our juror, our food evaluator. Every evening, he often gives me a score. Is it an A? Is it a B minus? Is it an F? And that's really interesting as well.
But it's not a benefit.
Yes, in a good way. So there is this term being used for the upcoming generation, and that's Generation RX. So children today are on more medications than ever before, and these are experimental medications. There is no long-term data on the outcome or the effects, and that is alarming. And a lot of the medications relate to malnutrition. Most Americans are on prescription medications related directly to diet. So once you can use what you're growing in your yard to replace what you're getting from the grocery store, now you have actual nutrition. So there's so much research out there showing how the soils are depleted or the food is overly processed and what that does. So, all over the world, the entire human race, 60% of the entire human race's diet is just 3 plants. And it's on the screen, but can you guess what they are? Wheat, rice, and corn, yes. And it's not like it's 20% for each. So most Americans, it's 60% meat. Pizza, pasta, burger buns, right? 13% of Americans eat pizza every day. A lot of moms are a pasta multiple times a week sort, right, to feed the children. So in 2022, close to 1 million people died thanks to the standard American diet. And the projection is that if trends continue, 3/4 of us will be overweight or obese, and half will be suffering from diabetes. So this is clearly not quality of life. So we look to, I'm on the Native Plant Society board, and that comes with some interesting insight. We know that there were people in Florida before the Europeans, and the documentation was the Europeans arrived and believed they had encountered the Garden of Eden. That Florida was so lush, so beautiful, that they believed that this was truly Eden. They came in search of the fountain of youth because if you're living off a diet purely of wheat and sugar, well, you're going to have some dental problems, some skin problems, some hair problems. And so the queen wanted a fountain of youth. And what's been discovered is that the fountain of youth is food. So in areas of the world where they're eating fresh from their garden, they are living longer. And we will talk about that. So, what were they eating? Well, they were eating things that allowed them to have bread, because that's what we're eating. And we have our cultural foundation that says, give us this day our daily bread. And we misinterpret that word to mean a Roman taxable loaf. But what it means is a protein-carb balance. And so that is what the natives in Florida had. They were robust and healthy. They were a beautiful people. The colonists, were crawling off the ship full of scurvy, and they were encountering these natives like, these people are beautiful. And they would not be beautiful if they did not have a variety of food offering them the nutrients needed. But the most important nutrient are the macronutrients. You cannot live without protein, carb, in a balance. So for some areas of the world where there are famine, it becomes meat and potatoes, right? So that is a protein-carb balance. However, if you've ever processed a deer or a rabbit, you know that's not free food. And so having a daily sustenance that you can just put on a griddle is actually much easier. So we have in different cultural texts this concept of having a single vessel and adding all sorts of things to that vessel. So in your first year, that might be cassava. In your second year, it might be green banana. In your third year, if you're really lucky, it might be jackfruit seeds, right? Pigeon pea, your first year. You can add all of that to a single vessel. And that is sourdough. But we've come to think of sourdough as only wheat. And so, I have a Facebook page and I'm feeding my vessel whatever I have. And people are always shocked that I'm feeding this vessel sweet potato. And I'm feeding it green banana. And I'm feeding it pigeon pea. And I'm feeding it coconut. And it's because you can. And if you're worried about messing up your precious starter, then you can just, as I also do, pull out the starter and mix in that content separate from the primary. But in doing so, you have an amalgamation of nutrients. And that means that these nutrients become more bioavailable. What does that mean? Well, vitamin A, when you eat it from a plant, maybe you'll get 10%. Maybe your body will absorb 10%. Maybe if you're lucky, it'll get 35%. But when you do things like this and you let it be essentially pre-digested, then actually you have more nutrients and more absorption of the original nutrients. So this is why it's kind of a cultural mainstay that's existed for so many thousands of years. The concept of bread is a fluid one. So anything that provides a carb protein, and it doesn't have to be in equal portions, because in your vessel, you're kind of equalizing. You can puree boiled cassava, and then the next day you're adding boiled pigeon peas or soaked pigeon peas. And that in itself is a protein-carb balance in the vessel. So we know that annual crops like tomatoes, they give us a sense of joy because they are an instant gratification. You're going to have a yield within 3 months. So for me, I'm saving those kind of crops for in my screened enclosure, in pots, or in my indoor hydroponic. So right today, I'm growing cherry tomatoes on my counter in a hydroponic. And tomatoes are an ideal hydroponic. But a hydroponic is not going to revolutionize our environment. So we know that climate change is sort of like the headline of today. And some would argue it's a pressing issue. And so this concept of what contributes to climate change, well, it's deforestation. And one of the primary reasons for deforestation is monocrop agriculture. So the clearing of all these native trees in order to grow an annual like wheat, which sucks up all the nutrients and creates a desert. It's a bummer. So what I'm doing is I have all my native trees like oak, elm, pine, maple. These are the keystone natives that host the most insects. I'll show you a table of that in a minute. And then I am planting directly underneath, all around, and I'm using my natives as my companion plants. So under my oak, I have everything from Mysore raspberry to pineapples around my pines. I have Barbados cherry. Under my oak, I've got purple collared tree, which is a perennial type of kale under my oak. I have papaya under my oak, and it produces all sorts of katuk. I have katuk all over underneath my oak, so it's doing just fine. What'd you say? I have, I'm sorry.
The native pawpaw.
No, I do not have that underneath my oaks. I have longevity spinach, Okinawa spinach, I have Wanilama earth, really anything other than a root crop, like cassava. And I consider cassava a first-year crop because I do not want to till my soil. I want my soil to increasingly become fertile. And so when people come and tour, they can actually see my soil off the driveway, and it's black. My soil's black. And just a couple years ago, it was sugar sand. It was just sand. So it happens really fast to transform, and I do not want to be digging in it and disrupting the magic that's occurring. So we want to grow perennials, ideally trees, because that counteracts all the dilemmas. Also, for me, happiness is doing things in a way that saves me effort. I'm a mom, I'm a homeschooling mom, I'm an author, I've got things going on. So I want to be efficient. So the 80-20 principle really matters to me, this concept of you can crack the code, figure out what works, and that's what our current system is. It's one way of cracking the code. So if 60% of the American diet can be one plant, that's highly efficient. The problem is it's an annual crop and is creating deserts. So we can crack the code and find an alternate bread source that is reforests. So we'll talk about that. And there are many plants. So we talk about cassava being our first year. You can have a dwarf coconut that will fruit within 5, green bananas. Many people will give you banana pups for free. I'm sure you know this. And so that's great. So you don't need a huge budget. Jackfruit, I argue you should grow them from seed. I know people like their grafted cultivars because they're looking for sugar content. But what I'm looking for is a taproot because I do not have irrigation and I don't use fertilizer. I use my native trees as fertilizers and for irrigation. Their massive root system ensures I have no erosion and they provide an interconnection with everything else. So people come in the dry season and they see everything lush and we tell them we have no irrigation, there's a disbelief. But having that taproot is essential. So I talked about native trees. I tell people if you have native trees on your property, do not remove them. That's my suggestion. These plants are considered the keystone trees that host the most caterpillars, and the caterpillars being the foundation of an ecosystem. And if you have an ecosystem, well, suddenly you don't have a pest problem. You don't need to use biocides. No pesticides, no herbicides are needed. Because you have these protection, these guardians of the forest in place. And so throughout, all over the world, and pretty much on every continent, oaks exist. And not surprisingly, in every culture, these beautiful myths and these origin stories center around oaks because they are the top keystone. And maybe people tens of thousands of years ago weren't using the word keystone and native, but they were witnessing that underneath an oak, in the dappled light, in the filtered light that changes, things were actually more successful, and they had a prolonged harvest season. So I am, like I mentioned, under an oak growing purple-collared tree. It's a kale. In the heat of the summer and in the dryness of the winter, I still have my purple collard, only under my oaks. They died everywhere else. So that is the truth in so many ways. So if you're thinking about homesteading and you want to increase your self-sufficiency, we know we have to find a flower alternative, which means a macronutrient alternative. So we've got pure starch, like a chira, unripe bananas, and a chira will produce within 2 years, so you just plan out. Cassava the first year, a chira the second year, then bananas my third year, and I'm moving away from my root crops now, my jackfruit, my pigeon pea, right? So your balanced carbohydrates. So for me, jackfruit is the all-star here. If you have a pond, sacred lotus, the seeds are also a balanced protein carb. So they are a wheat berry in and of themselves in terms of nutrition. They are a protein carb balance in and of themselves. So when I use green banana to make bread, I add an egg. Because green banana is a pure starch, I need the protein. But if I'm using jackfruit seeds, I don't really need to add anything. Maybe a little bit of fat, right? So, protein, winged bean will produce the first year and continue for several years and can grow in a small space, and it's root to seed edible. So the root itself is a high protein carbohydrate. So the root is a protein carb balance. The seed is a protein carb balance. You can eat the flowers even. So it is a completely edible plant. And if you do have small spaces, for me personally, I don't want to grow a plant that only has one edible part. If I have a small space, I want to grow a plant that's root to seed edible, because then I can eat from it all the time. Maybe it's not producing seed pods right now, but I can eat the leaves. You know, maybe the leaves are a little scarce. I'm going to go ahead and divide my tuber. So those types of plants that have numerous parts that are edible are ideal for a small space because they are efficient.
So which plant is that?
Winged bean.
Oh,
Winged bean. Protein oil, this is traditionally what we think of as nuts. Oil and protein oil are traditionally nuts. These are fatty. Fat's delicious. And if you're making a bread, what do you add? Oil. So if you have a vessel, that's your sourdough vessel, you can add coconut meal, a part or in it, and make flatbread. You don't need to add oil because coconut flour is going to have like a lot of fat still. So it saves you that time. If you just understand the macronutrients that these plants offer you, then you can make a delicious bread by just mixing the different flours. So moringa is also investigated as a high protein flour, but it needs to be boiled. So it has some anti-nutrient bitterness in the seeds. The seeds are also, pressed for oil, but the seed meal is used for flour as well. You just have to leach some of the bitterness. That's an anti-nutrient. Avocado oil we know about. So, and then your micronutrients and your phytochemicals. So most Americans are using only wheat, but you can see you can actually diversify your diet a great deal by creating your own flour, or at least supplementing the wheat with these. And so people always ask me, do you dry your own flour? Like, no, because it's an extra step. And honestly, dried flour suggests scarcity, which I do not have. So I went through the effort of harvesting my cassava roots and peeling them and removing the woody core, boiling it, drying it, pulverizing it. I didn't even use the flour because I have constantly other flour sources coming in, and I figured out you don't need to dry. I mean, if you're making bread, you add water. So if you're making pasta, it's like ironic, right? You wet the flour, then you dry the pasta, then you wet the pasta, right? And then you drain the pasta. So it's just a lot of wet, dry. And you can skip those steps. So I like to make flatbread. So today I'm talking about flatbread. And I'm talking about flatbread as a Frito maker because you can use a wet dough. So I do want to go back to oats just for a second because acorns are a protein-carb balance. So what were the natives eating? They were eating native trees. So you can use pine as a source of flour. They use the inner bark. Elm, the samaras are used to make flour. So we have a lot of things here. The chinkapin, native, make flour. So much of this can be used to make flour. So the natives were just using that. They don't have to till, they don't have to fertilize, no irrigation. Just go out there and just collect the stuff. That's it. There's plenty of pine, plenty of oak. So in a small space, the name of the game is to layer. And even if you just have a very tiny yard, if you have an oak, and then a jackfruit, and then a banana, and a pigeon pea, and winged bean, you're going to have flour year-round. So for me, if I'm looking for a recipe, I want a recipe that's not going to make my health worse. And if you go online and you look up recipes, they probably go something like this. Take your refined wheat flour, mix in a pound of melted butter, then add milk, right? Almost all of them. And then add egg. And it doesn't matter if you're making a bread or a cookie or a cake, it's all the same recipe. And so that's not a bad thing, but we can learn about ratios and we can learn how to do that from the food forest. And so these areas all over the world are where people are living to over 100 disease-free. They're called blue zones, and they're located the same distance from the equator as we are, which means we can grow what they grow, we can copy their recipes. But the number one ingredient in their recipe is relationships. Our relationships. So you might think, isn't it kind of lonely being in the kitchen all by yourself? Don't be in the kitchen by yourself. You know, isn't it kind of lonely being in the garden by yourself? Don't be in the garden by yourself. You know, the more social you are, the healthier you are. We are social creatures. Invite your friend over, make it a potluck, give it a go with somebody else. Like, utilize the concept of a community-supported kitchen or potluck. And that's what they're doing. They're eating together. They're sharing the gardening. They're sharing the cooking. It's a beautiful thing. And essentially what we have here is an example of cultural Darwinism. So when we use the word Darwinism, a lot of people think of only reproductive biology, right? Where the next offspring, hopefully, is better suited to the environment. But what we realize actually is that culture is often a more powerful Darwinistic element than biology. So when it comes to which species died out, which species didn't, which groups of people survived, which didn't, oftentimes the biology was comparable. It was the culture. It was the behavior. One group behaved differently than another group. And so we see that plainly today, where the human lifespan is actually up to 116. So we know humans can live to 116, and they can live to 116 and be lucid without Alzheimer's, without cognitive deficiencies. They can, and in these blue zones, they do. So what are they doing? They're eating from their gardens with their friends and family all the time. So if my 8-year-old can do this, we can do this. Oh, come on, you're 8 in April. So, all right, he's 7 and up. He's 7 and like 3 quarters. 11, 12. So oftentimes I have a resistance to something new. It will take me weeks. I'll have an idea, this is what I'm gonna do, and it'll take me weeks to do it because of the things that we've been taught. You have to be A+ at this. You have to do this right. This has to be good. And luckily my son doesn't have that burden. And so I always tell him, is our goal perfection? No, our goal is to have fun. And so having fun is actually a more powerful motivator, right? So if you're having fun in the kitchen, then you want to invite your friends over. If you're having fun in the kitchen, then you want to get back in there and do it again and try something else. So for me, fun means ratios, not recipes. Because if I'm in the kitchen, I don't want to be like, oh, I put a half teaspoon in that teaspoon. Also, I don't want to be bogged down with a ton of dishes. Oh, I dirtied another teaspoon. Oh, I dirtied another cup in a different bowl, and I just am making a huge mess. So for me, I want to understand ratios. I need an equal ratio of protein and carbohydrate, and anything beyond that is just yummy. So I need fat. If I want it yummy, a little salt. But if I want it to be bread, it's just an equal amount of protein and carb. The protein acts as a skeleton and will keep it from being like a soggy, kind of gelatinous mashed potato bread wannabe. That protein provides it with like a crisp structure. It's bread, it holds together. So if I'm working, yes?
What is that?
This is a crepe.
I know, but how did you make it?
Oh, okay. So this is what we're talking about today. So this is a flatbread, and I really like crepes. So this is just a crepe iron. It's like 20 bucks on Amazon. I was trying to do it the right way. I have a cast iron. I broke my cast iron. How do you break your cast iron? Broke my I cracked it. It like sparks now every time. It's like, ugh. I was like, you know what, honey? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna buy a $20 crepe iron. He was like, why are you even hesitating? Like, just get it. And I was able to go from making like 10 flatbreads in 30 minutes to making like 50 flatbreads in 30 minutes.
What I meant is, what is that flatbread?
It's what I'm telling you. This is a mix of sourdough, and it has coconut, it can have green banana, it can have egg. So if I'm using green banana, I need to have multiple eggs. So basically, for every cup of green banana boiled, I need like 2 eggs. It's just a ratio. I need to make sure I have enough protein to cover that green banana. If I have coconut, coconut does have some protein, but it has so much fiber. So I need a lot of water. Like I need like 3 times the amount of water. And I need to have at least 3 eggs per cup of coconut flour. So that's what it is. It's a sourdough mix. And then I'm just having fun. And so most people believe that they're eating a variety of food, but they're not. Like you go to the grocery store and like, I got crackers, and I got pasta, and I got a pizza crust, and I got a croissant, and I got a pastry. And you're like, girl, you got wheat, right? They're in different shapes. And that shapes are where it's at. So I'm learning that. So I'm like, we have a roll, we have a cup, we have a bundle. You like shapes? No problem. I have it flat, I have it stuffed, I have it stacked. Shapes, all different shapes. And the happiness factor is kind of going up. And it's super easy for me because I already have 50 crepes in the fridge. So I'm like, oh, dinner's no problem. We'll throw some hydroponic tomatoes on it. We'll throw some bananas on it. Throw some jackfruit in it. Done. Same thing. I learned that cultures slice their crepes to make fettuccine. So I made fettuccine, and my son was like, this is amazing. And I'm like, that's the easiest pasta I've ever made. All I did was run it through the pasta like cutter, because I had one, and that's it. But you could use a pizza cutter. You know, you could use a knife. So it's sliced, it's cornered, and it's rolled, but it's all the same thing. So we're looking for a protein-carb balance, and finding a bread source other than grains is how you get there. So my biggest challenge in life right now is consistency. And the sound, it's actually like it's audible. Basically, I'll put the crepe maker into the batter, and if it sounds like this, I'm like, oh, that's a good batter. If it sounds like this, oh, it's way too thick. So I add some more water. And it's really fascinating. I'm just like listening. I'm like, what? Why is it like sticking on top of the batter? It's not grabbing it. So coconut has so much fiber. You have to add a lot of water. So I need it to be very loose and pourable. And then you can really do anything. It's kind of only about consistency. If you've got a protein-carb balance, is it a thin gravy? Like, can you drip it? It needs to still coat the spoon. Like, you stick the spoon in it and you pour it out. It needs to be a steady stream, but it needs to still coat the spoon.
So this batter has coconut.
The batch that I made this week had a lot of coconut. I did use some of my husband's sourdough starter, and I mixed in more coconut meal than the sourdough starter.
Coconut meal.
Yeah, so I had made coconut milk, and so meal just means like coarse.
Yeah, coarse.
And I put it into the blender, my Vitamix blender, with like a lot of water, and it makes it fine. It makes it like a smoothie. But it needs to be a very drippy, light, thin batter if it's gonna make a crepe. So what are some good flour sources? When we talked about green banana, we talked about coconut, we talked about jackfruit seeds. I am not drying it. But if you want to experiment, you can get it dried, because it can be scary to like go out and get it from your yard. And I have to say, when I'm experimenting, sometimes I will like get something purchased so that I don't waste it. Because if I go out there and I harvest this precious ingredient, and then I just ruin it, that's devastating. But if it was like $5 at the store, I can deal with that loss. So crepe is just flour, eggs, and fat. This is milk. So the cow milk or goat milk has protein. And you're assuming wheat flour also has protein and the eggs have protein, but the eggs are serving as a binder, like a glue. So you can use other things, like you can use ripe banana as a binder, you can use mucilaginous greens as a binder. But if you know your flour is green banana and has no protein, then you need to really up the amount of eggs. So I just want to show you here just some comparisons. Wheat flour, 11 grams of protein. Coconut flour, almost 11 grams. But if you look at the fat, do not add oil. Do not. And then we have, sorry about it being a little blurry, we've got wheat flour, and then we have it compared with banana flour. And you do have to pay attention to things like fiber, because wheat has like 2 grams of fiber, whereas banana has like 12 grams of insoluble fiber. It's going to soak up so much water. So if it makes that bloop bloop, it's because you need to add more water. And the sweet potato also has a lot of fiber. But in terms of protein, we've got 11, 12 for wheat, we've got 10 for green banana, and we've got about 6 for the sweet potato. And then this is jackfruit, the rock star, the all-time. Oaks are a protein-carb balance with their acorns, and you can see all over the world how people have cultivated acorns as a bread stuff. In Mexico, their oak acorns are like this big in some regions. I'm very sure that was human intervention. Jackfruit, though, is a wonder in and of itself. So its seeds have about 17 grams of protein compared to wheat, which we said was 10 or 11. So that's a powerhouse. Again, it has high fiber, so you need to add a lot of moisture. Here are just pages from my book. My book is called Transforming 40 Yards. And like I said, if a plant has multiple edible parts, it's better for small yards. So these are examples of plants that do have multiple edible parts and are flower sources. Pigeon pea is a rock star. Moringa we know is amazing. But what is not commonly referenced is saba nut, also called Malabar chestnut, confused with money tree. This is a very underestimated staple crop. And the seeds and nuts are so much easier to get to. I mean, the pod bursts open itself. So you're like, okay, thank you. Pumpkins and all stuff. Soaps. Wouldn't that be awkward? So pumpkins and all-star, all you need is like a mound of manure or a mound of mulch. It does like to climb up a hill, and if you let it ramble, then it will be more disease resistant. So it has multiple edible parts. The seeds are a protein oil. I do use them as a crust. They're very high in fat, so it's a dessert, right? It's an indulgence. Very high in zinc. Most Americans are deficient in zinc, which is critical to our immune system. All right, hope you guys stay in touch. We're going to do a quick Q&A. I had the time indicator. This is my Facebook page, Transforming 40 Yards. I post what I'm eating. I post how I made it. pretty much every day. Just keeps me motivated. It's a wonderfully supportive community. Are there any closing questions?
When does your recipe book come out?
I am working on my recipe book, and I'm trying to make it very similar to this format. If you know a lot of recipe books, you're like, well, I have to go to the store and I'm going to have to spend $1,000 on all these ingredients. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to create 15 recipes for each plant. So if you have a food forest, you don't need a recipe that uses 3 bananas. You need a recipe that uses like 40 bananas, right? And it would be great if it were nutritious and health promoting, rather than like banana bread where you don't really feel too good about yourself after you eat that, you know? You're like, oh, well. So it is coming out. I feel like I'm pretty much done with the outline of it, and so I'm just kind of tightening up the concept. I want to also make my recipes in line with food combination. So there are some people who, there are nutrients in these plants, and if you pair certain vitamins and minerals together, then their absorption rate skyrockets. So I'm trying to also make recipes where I'm pairing the food stuff based on their nutrients. So if you make this recipe, you're gonna have a better absorption of nutrients than if you ate it a different way. So it's a process, it's coming out soon. I am gonna be asking people for feedback and to test it out. Any other questions? Maybe one last one? Yes?
You said you do tours at 5 o'clock on Sunday?
5 o'clock on Sunday, yes.
Okay, if you grow the green banana, how do you make flour?
So you can dry the bananas. You just dry them, peel it all. Some people do, but I like a wet batter. So I cut the ends off my green banana. I make a slice on the peel. I boil the whole thing for like 10 minutes to remove the tannins, and then I have stuff for a batter to make crepes. But I also have a potato substitute. I'll make potato salad. I make French fries once a week using the green bananas. So I can use it in a lot of different ways. You can make tostones,
Just
baked.
mash it up.
What'd you say?
I said, just mash it up after you boil it.
Yes, I just stick it in my blender with equal parts water. And that's a batter, but if I'm gonna make a crepe, then I add some eggs. Equal part moisture, like eggs, water. All right, thank you so much for having me. I sincerely hope this was useful to you.